You can't scale your organization without the right people, the right skills, and the right mindsets. And that's our focus today, right here on the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. Let's go.
Welcome to the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. We are here each week to help you lead more confidently and make a bigger difference, both professionally and personally. This episode is sponsored by Kevin's free weekly e-newsletter, Unleashing Your Remarkable Potential, which is full of articles and resources to help you become a more confident and successful leader. Sign up by going to remarkablepodcast.com/newsletter. And now, here's your host, Kevin.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. I am glad that you're here. Let me ask you a question. Do you want ordinary or extraordinary results? It's kind of a simple question with an obvious answer. We're going to talk today about getting extraordinary results with an expert at helping organizations and individuals do that. His name is Richard Lee. Let me tell you about him. He's well known in the California Bay Area and Silicon Valley for helping companies build organizational capacity to scale and grow. That's a part of the world where a lot of companies have done that over the years, my friends. He designed Work That Counts in and across teams, a new program designed to help participants make a bigger difference in complex organizations. And his new book with the same title is now available. Prior to launching Work That Counts, he consulted with hundreds of companies and thousands of professionals around the country and built a business around the vital smarts, crucial conversations work. Richard, welcome to your very first podcast.
Yes, thank you very much, Kevin. I'm very glad to be here and share what I can with you and the world.
And this is exciting to be the first time that you're a guest. So we're gonna have fun, and everyone listening is going to be channeling all good thoughts for us. How about that?
Thank you. That sounds great.
All right. So you didn't wake up when you were 5 years old and say, I want to be a corporate trainer and consultant, I'm guessing. So tell me a little bit about your journey, like how you ended up doing this kind of work and led you to where you are today.
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. You're right, I didn't. But what did happen is after I got my bachelor's degree in human development, I was focused more on how to help people at large. And then after I was in that field for a while, I realized that I had kind of a business bent. And I thought that, well, people work 8-10 hours a day at work. That's a significant part of their life journey. And I wanted to help them there and help companies succeed. So then I went and got my master's in management and organizational effectiveness and an internship in that area in a company that had at the time, it was about a $500 million company, and pursued that. And recognized really early on that my kind of superpower was facilitation, that I just loved getting groups together, trying to pull out their ideas, helping get them on the same page, helping draw out what they already knew, and then sharing that wisdom with others. And it was through that experience of literally doing hundreds and hundreds of management and executive offsites that formulated this work, as well as having headed up, that function in multiple companies.
All right. Well, we're glad that you're here, and I'm glad that you've written this new book, Work That Counts, Breaking Down the Barriers to Extraordinary Performance. And I want to tell everyone before we dive in that this book leans heavily on mindset, which is another reason why I love the book. And so we're going to talk about 3 mindsets, really, that are the major framework for the book.
Sure.
But before we get to those, and we will get to those, sort of talk to us about how, from your perspective in working with leaders and organizations for so many years, why put the focus on mindset before we get to the specific mindsets?
Yeah.
Talk to us from your perspective about why that is such an important point
Yeah,
for us to consider.
and with so many of these things, it's been a journey. I actually started off with the word levers because of the concept of our firm's name is Leveraging Impact LLC, and the idea is, well, how do you get more done with less pain than any one person would be able to do? And then that morphed into the concept of mindsets, because we realized that number one, lever, some people get, some people don't. But mindset is more significant. Mindset is something that touches a little bit your soul, so to speak, in that it's deeper and it's not mechanical. It's not, well, just flip these three buttons and life will be good. It's you want to switch these three buttons, but you have to be there and you have to kind of do it for the right reasons. And so these three mindsets are tied to skill sets. And the skill sets are, in a sense, the actionable aspects of the mindsets.
And that's why I like the book, because our work and our thinking aligns in that area, I think, a great deal. So without teasing the audience any further, at a high level, we're going to talk about each of them a little bit more, but at a high level, what are those three mindsets that are critical to creating the impact people want to make in organizations?
Yeah. Well, and again, this isn't a tease, this is part of it, is the key is that these are interconnected and interdependent. So what I found in working with so many of these wonderful people, wonderful teams that I had the honor to work with at these really prestigious companies, is that these came up over and over and over again. The first one is, well, how do you get the fuel to take action and drive decisions? And this is what many people refer to as empowerment. I kind of morphed it into what I call empowered relationships. And this idea is that somehow each individual needs to show up with a reasonable degree of autonomy to be able to take action and drive decisions. Now, notice I'm using the word drive and not make, because in complex organizations, there aren't that many people that get to make real decisions, but they drive decisions, especially when you're talking cross boundaries. So the first one is what I refer to as empowered relationships, that ability to take action and drive decisions. The second one is somehow people needed to be able to figure out how to individually and collectively choose to do the right thing for their broader team, not just for that team to whom they report. And I ultimately refer to this as aligning to do the right thing for their real team, which is broader than their own smaller team. And the third one has to do with, well, how do you enable people to partner in and across teams to achieve goals? And it's one thing to partner within a team, to collaborate within a team. That's hard. Collaborating across teams is that much harder because there are conflicting priorities that get in the way of doing that effectively. And so many people end up referring to this as the ACE format. And I didn't like that initially. I resisted it because I thought, well, that's so trivial. And you've got ACE hardware, you've got ACE everything. But it is a very easy, simple way to remember it. Alignment to do the right thing, collaborating in and across teams, and having an effective, empowered relationship.
All right, Richard, you and I have been consultants and trainers for a long time. We are those people that use those words, right? And one of those words is empowerment. And there are people that are watching us, more cynical than I, that are saying to themselves, another book about empowerment, really? Kevin, can you come up with something different? But I think well, first of all, the reason people talk about it is it's important. And the second reason that it's important for us to talk about it here is that you are taking a slightly different approach to it. So you talk about empowered relationships. So let's talk about that a little deeper and what you really mean, because so many people hear that word and don't even know what it means.
Yeah. So part of it goes back to how I'm defining it. I'm defining it as a reasonable degree of autonomy for people to be able to take action and drive decisions. So, and as you said, Kevin, it's not only important, it's critical. To me, it's a requirement. I call people who are not adequately empowered the ready and waiting and waiting and waiting. I mean, things just come to a standstill, or they're reckless and dangerous. So it's more than important. And to get it right, what I found, because when I did so many of these offsites and these conversations with people, I would ask them specifically, what gets in the way and what do you need to make the right difference, the kind of difference you want to make commensurate with your capability and talent in your organization. And so what I found is it's not only what the manager or leader needs to do, but what the other person needs to do in order to make this work. And that each empowered relationship is unique and dynamic. So it changes over time. It's not, well, let's get it perfect today and then it'll be perfect forever. No, it's something we need to fine tune on an ongoing basis. So we actually look at, well, what do you need to do to fine tune this critical relationship? So to get right at it, we look at, well, what does that team leader or manager need to do to be more empowering, to ultimately let go and lift up? And what does that direct report or team member need to do to be more empowerable? Okay, to be more empowerable, to ultimately step up and earn it. And it's this stepping up and earning it that is critical. And the way we look at it is that if you do these two things well, both roles are being executed well, it strengthens the trust between them.
Oh,
and when you
100%.
strengthen the trust between them, then the team leader is more likely to let go at an appropriate level so that the team member can ultimately do their thing in an effective manner.
So a couple of thoughts about that.
Yeah.
Number one is, we mentioned it in the beginning and your experiences with complex organizations. And it's sort of, while we haven't used this word, and maybe you don't like the word, but the word that keeps coming up for me is this idea of a matrix. Like we're in a
Sure.
complex organization.
Mhm.
It isn't simple. And I would
Yeah.
say to those of you watching or listening that, if you're a 3-person organization, there are some leaders that still aren't good at any of the stuff.
Oh, yeah.
That you're
They
just
can
said.
absolutely use this.
So, well, that's what I was going to say is that while a leader of a small organization might still be very poor at this, if they're good at it, this is pretty straightforward. But the bigger and more complex the organization, the more important it becomes. Because I'm going back to your archetype of ready and waiting, and I'm guessing that many people watching and listening in large organizations were resonating with that. Yeah, like I feel like we're always waiting.
Yeah.
And not the only, but one of the reasons we're waiting is because of this very fact. And that's why I think it's such an important piece.
Yeah.
It's empowered
Yeah.
relationships, and getting that right starts with the mindset, and then it's the skills to actually do it, as you started to say.
Yeah. Yeah. And we have identified key skills that are not necessarily generic to empowerment or empowered relationships. We identified key skills that are critical to working in and across teams.
Correct.
So kind of a mothership term that could be used as collaborative leadership. And it's not just for really large organizations. I've had people literally at 5 to 10 person organizations, when I share some of these thoughts with them, they're going, oh, wow, do we need this stuff?
Yeah, absolutely.
It would make a huge difference.
Absolutely. It doesn't mean that any of us watching and listening don't need it. I was just trying to add that other layer of complexity, makes it even more important. So
It sure
you talk
does.
about the empowered relationships as the fuel.
Yeah.
So why do you call it the fuel?
I like that term, the fuel. And the reason is because I think you can have, I've got an iPhone here. Works great. I love it. But if the charge goes out, how good is it? It's useless. It's just absolutely useless.
Paperweight, perhaps.
Good paperweight. And it looks nice. But what I mean, though, is you got to have the fuel. So the way I tie it in directly is I think of an organization. I'm sure you've seen this, and the people listening and viewing this have seen this. You're sitting in a meeting and somebody else is from a different function or something, and they're in the meeting. And every time it's ripe to be trying to come to some consensus on a decision, they say, well, I've got to go back and talk to my boss about it. And how often have you heard that, right? Well, they don't have the fuel and they're slowing everything down. So they've got to have the fuel to be able to take action and drive decisions. That's where I get that from.
So we've got empowered relationships.
Yeah.
And so the next piece of the puzzle, the next piece of your model is the mindset of being of align to do the right thing. And before you talk about that specifically, you talk a lot. You mentioned it earlier, but I don't want to miss it. You talk about the idea of what you call the quote real team. So what do
Yeah,
you mean by the real team? Because that ties us back to
it sure
align.
does. So when you ask people, what team are you on in a company, they will inevitably say the group that they report to. Oh, I'm in marketing. I'm in sales. I'm in the Western region of sales. I'm in engineering. I'm working on this product.
I
I'm
work
in
for
this
Richard,
business group.
right?
and the problem with that is that to the extent that they do that, they're operating on a very myopic vision for what's most needed. I go back to, I designed and delivered this program decades ago. We called it the Collaboration Challenge. It was a 3-day program, super cool. Did it at beautiful resorts. Um, uh, and I kicked it off with a simulation, which I didn't design, but I kicked it off with a simulation that I designed into the program, that we had people trying to save the planet in these 6-person teams. There were like 70 or 80 people there. And they all knew the name of the program was Collaboration Challenge. We'd done like over 20 of these programs with this particular company. And they were trying to save the world from this virulent virus, talk about being a little prescient, right?
Yeah.
And at the end of it, we'd ask them, well, now rate yourself and how effective your team was. And they'd all give themselves like a 9 or a 10 on a 10-point scale. And I say, but you didn't quite figure this out until the very last minute to save the planet. What was the team here? And they all would say, well, we are 6-person teams. We've got like 10 of them in the room. And I say, well, what's the real team here? And you just see the light bulbs going off in the room. Oh, it's our whole team. I'm going, yeah, it's bigger than you think. And so it's the same in companies. And
Oh,
whether you're in healthcare, tech, banking, pharmaceuticals, government, it doesn't matter. People lose sight of their real team. Same in our families. We didn't get to this at all yet, Kevin, but I really wrote this so that people could apply it to their family life as well.
yeah. So it's
Your
however
real team.
define the team defines their behavior,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
And so and that's why I so much want. And of course, now their gears are turning. I can't see anybody, but I'm guessing that their gears are turning. Oh, if the real team is larger, then this alignment thing makes a lot more sense. So now tie it back to align.
Yeah. So this idea then is, well, for most salaried professionals within companies, they have quite a bit of discretion as to how they spend their time. What do I say yes to? What do I say no to? And know that if you say no to person A, they're likely to respond similarly when you ask them for help down the road. And yet, if you say yes to everybody, you're just way too distracted. So this idea is, well, what do I really finish today and what don't I finish? And the idea is we need to be able to figure out how to individually and collectively align to do the right thing. So I go into the how to management and leadership teams do that, from the top team to lower level management teams, and make sure that's aligned. That was the bulk of the work I did when I did this with hundreds and hundreds of management executive teams. But also, how do I just figure that out for me? So let me give you an example. How do I figure that out for me? One is this idea of make sure you remember that your team is bigger than you think. But also, well, how do you get the help you need when these other people don't report up through you or your own senior management? And so we have starters that we suggest people can use and steps that they can use to basically, again, influence without authority, but within this particular realm of how do I get things done in and across teams and break down these barriers to extraordinary results.
Perfect. Excellent. So that takes us to the C. right?
Yeah,
So we've
yeah,
talked about the fuel, which is empowerment. We've talked about aligning. We've talked about the real team. And if we've got a team, then there's this piece around collaboration we need to say more
yeah,
about. And so I want to have you talk about what you talk about in the book, and then I want to make a couple more comments. Make a couple more comments about collaboration on top of that. So
yeah, yeah.
as you're talking about collaboration as one of the three mindsets, before we actually get to skill, uh, talk to us about what you mean in that regard and how that fits into this model.
Yeah, yeah. Well, similar to talking about when you don't have empowerment reasonably, you get the ready and waiting. If you don't have reasonable collaboration, you get what I call the alienator. And the alienator is somebody who's ticking people off left and right. At a minimum, they're not taking advantage of the power of the team. So again, this is a critical required ingredient. It goes back in some ways to how do people play in a sandbox? Do they take their ball and go home? Do they know how to play with others? This is where a lot of people have benefited, men and women, from being on sports teams when they're growing up. Learn how to be a team player. And now that, again, kind of do we need that language? In some ways we really do, but how to do it in a way that works. So one of the ideas here is to embrace the tension. Most people think of collaboration as simply finding consensus. And it's way harder than that. And it involves much, much more. So this idea of how do we know when we're discussing a topic and trying to come up with some innovative solution that actually works and moves the needle, how do we know when we're there? How do we fight? How do we get our passion into the picture? How do we really move it forward in a way that we can be proud of? Well, that's not just consensus. That's real collaboration. Now, if you don't have the fuel, it doesn't work. If you're not aligned, it doesn't work. And in fact, what one person said to me, kind of not quite cynically, but said at one point when we were talking about this stuff, well, we're not really aligned at the top, so I don't see how this stuff can help. And I said, well, but you and so therefore you can't collaborate or you can't have empowered relationships. And I said, but you can't collaborate if you aren't aligned. I mean, I'm sorry. And you can't get aligned if you don't collaborate.
Right.
That's what I meant to say. You can't get aligned if you don't collaborate. And you need the fuel. So the idea is, again, these three are inextricably linked. We really need all three of them to make it work.
If we just sit here, excuse me, and wait, back to your ready and waiting archetype. Yeah. If we just sit here and wait for someone else to get us in alignment, then we're certainly not collaborating, and we're not exhibiting anything close to empowerment, right? So the reality is that if once any of us understand the three pieces of your model, then they have the chance to say, what might we be missing, and how do we identify what we need to do now to help move forward? Agreed?
Yeah, absolutely. And the key here is what we refer to as your impact score and what we mean by the impact catalyst. So we could ask each person to rate themselves on a scale of 1 to 5. Well, how effective are you at each of these three areas? And not just do you know the right thing to do, but do you actually do it when you should? Like we all know we should listen, but we don't necessarily do it when we really should, right? Especially when we think we're right. And but on a scale of 1 to 5. And what the idea here is that most people, what I find, ultimately think of themselves as like a 3 or a 4, or would rate their organization as kind of a 2, 3, or a 4. We can multiply these three ratings together to get their impact score. So if you said you were a 3 on each of these, it'd be a 3 times 3, which is 9 times 3 is 27. But that's a 27 out of a 5 times 5 times 5. 5 times 5 is 25, times 5 is 125. And the point here is it really, I think, makes it that much more clear, this interdependent aspect. And that if all three of these are, if any one of the three is weak, it will disproportionately diminish overall impact. If all three are strong and in sync, it will inordinately drive greater impact and results. So what the word or phrase we use for that person who, or the team who is a 5x5x5 is an impact catalyst. These people are magic. They are just incredible at any level in an organization. But when you see them, they have incredible impact beyond themselves. I'm convinced these are the three mindsets that enable that.
It is really awesome. And I really do. I'm so glad that you mentioned that idea of the multiplication of them highlights the interdependency and
Yes.
interconnectedness of them. So the other thing I want to ask you, you sort of summarized the overall piece, but there's something going on in our world right now. It's called COVID, that has changed where we work and in many ways how we work. So what are your thoughts about specifically? We could probably do a whole episode on that related to the model, but I just want to ask you about collaboration. So what are your thoughts about collaboration in a remotely working world, and how would you advise folks to think about that today?
I appreciate the question, Kevin. This is actually very, very hot on my mind. This is something I'm actually in the process of writing some articles about. I don't think we're ever going back to before time completely. Kind of getting everybody in a room for training programs and offsites on a regular basis, and all the, kind of people showing up inside the company. I don't think it's ever going to happen again. Many companies now are talking about either permanent remote work, or like your people are coming in 2 to 3 to 4 days a week and they'll be remote for a day or two a week. I think what it does, it brings back to me the importance of much of the work I did in the past on offsites. And what we used to do is we would have annual and quarterly offsites for executive teams and then for the senior functional teams, and they would cascade it down. And the idea is in Silicon Valley, as you can imagine, so much changes so quickly as it is throughout the rest of the world. But people can work at a place in 5 years and have 4 different managers, and people working in 4 different locations. Is that I always told them, well, you want to accelerate building trust on a team by getting people in a room together. Okay, so my sense of this is we're going to live in a hybrid society. It's not ever going to go back totally to the way it was. And in that hybrid society, in hybrid culture we're going to live in, I think what we're going to want to do is really turn back the heat on getting people back together quarterly in whatever team there are that counts. And then it's going to be up to the people leading those meetings to lead them differently than they would normally. It's not just a staff meeting. They've got to get to the bigger picture. They've got to look at alignment. They've got to look at what's working, what isn't, relative to how we're working together. So they really use that time on a quarterly basis to the best of their advantage. Whether that's a 1 day, a 2 day, I don't know, but it's not a 2 hour. And it's trying to get those people in a room and then take advantage of the Zoom meetings. And you and I are both in the learning world and consulting world. Zoom is great, or whatever format you're using.
Whatever platform. Yeah.
And online training is great. So I think what we're going to see is more online training that's used immediately preceding these offsites. So then people have a foundation that they can then actually operationalize in those offsites. And by offsites, I'm just talking about the concept of getting people in a room, right?
As much as you can. Room, and not a Zoom room, right?
Yeah, as much as you can.
So thank you for that. I appreciate that. So before we go, I have a couple of other questions, sort of shifting gears. We're sort of largely done talking about the book at this point, almost. What do you do, Richard, for fun? I mean, I'm looking at you. I see a guitar over there in the corner.
Yeah.
I'm guessing that might be a clue. But what do you do for fun?
Yeah, I have 2 real passions. I mean, I've been married for over 40 years and have a wonderful family that I'm delighted with. But music, I play guitar and sing, and I'm a kiteboarder. Not just regular kiteboarding, but where you're on a hydrofoil and the board's off the water. And I go kiteboarding in Maui in Mexico and here on the Bay in San Francisco Bay Area. And And those two things are kind of my passions.
But not at the same time. You don't play your guitar
Not
while
at the same
kiteboarding.
time. I'll tell you, people have asked me to do it.
I'm sorry, I'm just being silly.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so I know we talked about this before we hit record, that you're a reader. So what are you reading now?
Yeah, I'm really intrigued by the book by Greg McEwen called Essentialism. And what he really gets at is he takes alignment to kind of a, a further level of be real clear of what's important and what isn't, both at work and in life. And if you're saying yes to everything, you're saying yes too often. And don't get distracted by what's not important. And then I, again, kind of pair that with my model around in a complex environment, you have to really team with people outside of your boundaries as well. So it's a nice complementary relationship.
So Richard, you're almost finished with your first podcast.
Yeah.
How about that? So, but there's now you've been saying, Kevin, when are you going to ask the most important question? The most important question Richard wants me to ask is, so where can we learn more about your work, and where can we learn more about this book? So tell us, Richard. I'll hold it up. Tell us about where we can learn more about you
Yeah.
and your work.
I'll tell you, thank you, Kevin. And you've been wonderful for my first podcast host. The simplest way to get there is workthatcounts.com. And workthatcounts.com, there's a /book, takes a look at the overall book and how to buy it and other comments of people who seem to have enjoyed it, as well as our training programs and consulting and so on.
Workthatcounts.com, everybody. And now, before we go, I have a question for all of you who are watching and listening, and that is, now what? There's plenty here for you to ponder. But while we've been talking mostly about mindsets, what Richard and I both want you to do is to take some action. And so the question is, now what? What are you going to do with what you got? Which of the three mindsets sort of got you thinking? If you did your own score of the three, where do you think you'd be? How will you use some of these ideas for yourself and with your team? Until you do that, this was of marginal value. When you do that, great things can happen for you and your team. And you can move, as I said at the start, from ordinary results to extraordinary results. So, Richard, thank you for being here. It was a pleasure to have you.
Well, thank you so much, Kevin. I really enjoyed chatting with you. And I hope this brings to light for some people that they can actually get that much more impact for themselves, their teams, and their organizations, and their families.
I'm so confident that will be true. And before we go, everybody, this episode has been brought to you by our new book, The Long Distance Teammate, Staying Engaged and Connected While Working from Anywhere. You can learn more by going to longdistanceteammate.com, because there's a big difference between working from home and being a successful remote teammate. And with that, we will close today, and I'll be back next week with another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. We'll see you then.